Vice President Biden's deficit group is still meeting. Their goal, I guess, is to hammer something out before you have to raise the debt ceiling, although we've already reached the debt ceiling. It's just a question of how long the Treasury Department can do these extraordinary maneuvers to keep us from defaulting on the debt. It sounds actually like they're reaching some agreement. Supposedly over $1 trillion in spending cuts have been agreed to, but ultimately it's going to come down to not just the size of the spending cuts.
Well, that's right. We've got the debate over the debt limit actually has little to do with our longer-term budget challenges. I mean, they could decide to come to a compromise and pass the increase in the debt ceiling and yet not really address these challenges. But the hope is that they're going to use this opportunity and all the attention on the deficit situation to actually start talking about more serious solutions to our long-term challenges. So those have to include not just the discretionary spending cuts that they're probably willing to actually take a stand on right now, but includes our major entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, and what we're doing on the revenue side of the federal budget, which is not right now raising enough revenue.
I think that's the interesting thing, that you can have as many good stories as you want about $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion agreement on spending cuts, but ultimately they're not just going to be able to pass a deal with only spending cuts. There's going to have to be revenue, and that's really where the rubber meets the road on this kind of agreement.
Right. I mean, we're trillions of dollars away from a sustainable budget deficit in terms of the 10-year budget outlook, let alone what we're headed toward for the decades beyond. And we're going to have to start coming up with really fundamental reforms of our major programs, both on the tax and spending side, before we're going to make any headway on that regard.
And I think the good news is that we've seen a bunch of new plans be released, 6 new plans at the Peterson Foundation event, and all 6 plans shared the goal of decreasing tax expenditures, which increases revenue. And this really seems to be consensus developing that this is the area where the Biden group and any deficit reduction groups going forward are going to have to find a lot of their revenue, because raising tax rates seems to be a political impossibility right now.
The spending cuts that we would have to pass to get the budget deficit under control are even too large for Republicans to put up with. So they have proposed, even Republicans, ways to raise revenue through base broadening. They just choose to use some of that for tax rate reduction at the same time. So as part of the Peterson Foundation event, where the 6 budget plans from from the different think tanks were unveiled, they invited the Gang of 6, now Gang of 5, to come talk about their efforts and their bipartisan talks. So what did we learn from that session?
Well, one of the things we learned is that some of the reports in the media that this week or next week or another week is the make or break week for this gang is probably not the case. There were 4 of the now 5 members of the gang there, 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and to a man, they were big believers in what they're doing, and also amazingly still very optimistic that they're going to be able to come up with some kind of plan. I think the most interesting thing really is that it's not that the 6 or the 5 or the 4 can't agree on the substance of the plan. It's that they're not just trying to agree amongst themselves, but they're holding out for some kind of deal that they think can get 60 votes in the Senate, which is a huge hurdle. It's much easier to get 4 votes, 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans, even given how hard that is. But the real ambitious goal that if they're going to go out on a limb to produce a plan, it's got to be one that has a chance of getting 60 votes, is quite difficult to figure out. So they're managing not just the nuts and bolts mathematically about how you reform the programs, what spending cuts, what tax increases, but also how do you come up with a coalition for 60 votes.
Did they talk about common ground in their presentation yesterday?
I think the common ground among them is the same as the common ground we talk about a lot at the Concord Coalition. You have to make long-term changes to the entitlement programs. You have to set limits on discretionary spending, both defense and non-defense. And ultimately, at the very least, you have to broaden the base, cut out tax expenditures so that you can bring more revenue in. And I think that really is becoming a consensus position, which I think people underestimate how far we've come in just the last 6 months to a year on that.
Right.